In the 17th year of the Chongzhen reign, Emperor Chongzhen died in the sacrifice of the state. The traitor Wu Sangui was enraged and led the Qing army into the border, causing the land of China to be severely poisoned. The people are wandering, carrying a continuous stream of people, crying profusely in the wilderness, with corpses and bones piled up. The rulers and ministers of the Southern Ming Dynasty colluded and fought against each other, hoping to clear the enemy and launch a western expedition. The Dashun Peasant Army, which had once rebelled against the rule of the Ming Dynasty, ran on the front line of resistance against the Qing Dynasty. At first, Li Zijing was unwilling to accept the identity of a bandit and a traitor. However, being in the bandit camp, he was involuntarily pushed to the peak of power by the tide of the times. In times of chaos, human life is like a blade of grass. If we don't die like this, we need to change our way of life. Grasping power, integrating smoothness, and carrying the banner of Anti-Qing. Everyone has a responsibility for the rise and fall of the world. In the past, opposing the Qing dynasty was to save oneself, but now opposing the Qing dynasty is to save the world. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for anti-cleaning. Download the complete collection of anti-cleaning TXT, and read the latest chapters for anti-cleaning. Chapter 1. 13 Days. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. 13 Days. The remaining sun is like blood. The strong wind is raging, and the flags of Dashun and Daqing are intertwined in the air, hunting and making sounds. In front of me, Pingchuan is engaged in a bloody battle. Underneath were dilapidated city walls, and the Dashun army, dressed in various arrow robes, was fighting against the Qing army with their lives. The sound of footsteps, artillery fire, and shouting could not be ignored. Li Zijing looked at everything with a wooden expression, followed by a sudden dizziness in his mind. Before he could recover, he was suddenly thrown to the ground. "What's wrong with you? You're not going to die anymore." A middle-aged man wearing a light blue arrow coat and a felt hat roared with saliva flying in front of him. "If I were any slower, your life would be gone." Li Zijing immediately recognized the person standing in front of him, who was his own brother Li Zicheng. Or, to put it another way, it's the original biological brother. The originally solid city wall was shattered by a shell from an unknown source, and the several old camps standing by just now disappeared out of thin air, leaving only a pool of bright red blood. Watching this scene, Li Zijing's heart trembled slightly. A few lives are usually gone after mowing grass. What kind of world is this? But Li Zijing now has no room to care about the lives of others. The most important thing is how to save his own life before Tongguan is about to be conquered. Li Zijing's consciousness, or rather his soul, comes from 400 years later. But now, it is on the real battlefield of Tongguan on December 29, the 17th year of the Chongzhen reign. The towering Ming Dynasty, which was once known for its 7 voyages to the west and 5 expeditions to Mongolia, was overthrown by the Dashun Peasant Army led by Li Zicheng on March 19 this year. Subsequently, the traitor Wu Sangui led the Qing army into the customs, and the Dashun army was defeated by the Shanhaiguan. They fled for thousands of miles and retreated from the capital to their hometown of Shaanxi. According to historical circumstances, Dashun could not stay in Shaanxi either. He would have followed Li Zicheng and fled all the way, eventually dying under the encirclement and interception of the Qing army. More than 2 months ago, Li Zijing was still a graduate student in the Department of History at Fudan University. After preparing his graduation thesis, he lay on the table and took a nap. At that time, he was still thinking of waking up and going back to his dormitory to get enough sleep. But I didn't expect that it would be the most secure sleep in the past 2 months. When Li Zijing woke up from his dream, he found himself riding a horse, with pursuers wearing money mouse tails behind him, shouting incomprehensible bird songs. Although I couldn't understand, Li Zijing also understood that it was definitely not a good thing. Over the past 2 months, Li Zijing has not even slept soundly, fighting everywhere, and the only thing he can do is run. Faced with the ferocious Qing army, Li Zijing, who had become the younger brother of King Li Chuang, knew that the Qing army would never let him go. Once he left the main force of the Dashun army, he had no capital to resist. So Li Zijing could only continue to run, and after more than 2 months, he lived aimlessly, like a lost dog. During this period, Li Zijing's heart was in turmoil. From being a talented student and a proud son of heaven in later generations, he woke up and became a leader of bandits in the late Ming and early Qing dynasties, and then embarked on a journey of escape for hundreds of miles. This kind of drop is not an exaggeration to describe it as falling into an ice cave. Do you think if you hide under the city and Qinggo hits in, you can be released? The steel knife in Li Zicheng's hand was stained with blood, and the blood-red sunset was hanging above his head, with a slight tremble in his voice. Looking at the scattered Dashun army in the city, Li Zijing suddenly realized that, yes, following the historical path like this, he had only a dead end. As a blood relative of Li Zicheng, the Qing army definitely wanted to kill him quickly, and history has proven that this is not just sensationalism. In history, Li Zijing was defeated and surrendered to the Qing Dynasty in Huguang, and was brutally killed by the Qing army. Even if Prince Chu San had been hiding for most of his life, he would still be discovered and exterminated by Kangxi in the end. As for the Southern Ming Dynasty, Li Zijing understood that it was better to believe that he could turn things around than to believe in the young Wulong and Phoenix who had united to pacify the bandits in history. The Qing army wanted to kill me quickly, but Nanming regarded me as a bandit. I can't hide or run away. Then we'll have to risk our lives at Tongguan. Li Zijing picked up the hat and helmet that had fallen on the ground and put it on his head. He clenched the goose feather sword in his hand, and his gaze gradually became firm. It seems that I have no second choice but to firmly oppose the Qing dynasty. Li Zijing let out a bitter smile, lamenting how unfair his fate was. I'm afraid there's no more tragic traveler than myself. As soon as they crossed over, they were driven away by the Qing army like rabbits, running from Taiyuan to Tongguan and fleeing for nearly 100 miles. If we continue to run like this, once Tongguan is lost, the entire Shaanxi province will fall. In a few months, we will follow the footsteps of our original selves and follow Li Zicheng to defeat in Huguang. While Dashun has not yet suffered a complete defeat in Shaanxi and the Battle of Tongguan has not yet been completely defeated, we need to do something to salvage the situation. At least, Dashun cannot be defeated so quickly in Shaanxi. The title of Li Zijing's graduation thesis in later generations was about the defeat of the Dashun army, and he was well aware of the final outcome of the Tongguan battle before him. The Dashun army will soon be sandwiched between the Qing army and be attacked from both sides, and finally abandon Tongguan. Dang 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 dang. The rapid sound of gongs suddenly echoed throughout the entire city. Li Zijing looked up and saw that with the sound of gongs, the army formation of the Dashun army in front of the pass was retreating like a tide under the light blue banner. Pale blue, that is Li Zicheng's banner of daring to become a king. Ming Jin withdrew his troops. Li Zijing gazed into the distance, and across the mountains and fields were the defeated soldiers of the Dashun army. Just a moment ago, the Qing army's iron cavalry had already unstoppably broken through the right wing of the Dashun army, and then directly attacked the central army, harvesting the battlefield like a wind rolling through remnants of clouds. In front of the 80,000 Dashun army, they launched an attack on the camp of the Qing army 20 miles away. Although the number of troops was better than that of the Qing army, they were completely unable to exert themselves on the narrow and uneven terrain in front of Tongguan. If you remember correctly, tonight is the decision to go smoothly, which is also your last chance of fate. A Dashun general named Lu Fangliang will propose a plan to launch a night attack on the Qing army camp tonight. But in fact, the Qing army had long anticipated that the Dashun army would attack the camp tonight and had arranged an ambush in advance. In history, the night attack of the Dashun army was also very rough and disorganized. Lu Fangliang led over 1,000 elite cavalry from the old camp to charge towards the Qing army camp, only to fall into a trap and be surrounded by two Qing armies, resulting in heavy losses. Since the defeat at Shanhaiguan, Li Zicheng has fled in disarray and failed to win a battle, fearing the Qing army like a tiger. The failure of the night attack directly led to Li Zicheng giving up the initiative to attack and retreating to Tongguan to defend himself, resulting in a complete standoff with the Qing army for 13 days. Only Li Zicheng knows what these 13 days mean. Because in 13 days, the Qing army will transport dozens of red barbarian cannons, and the indestructible city walls of Tongguan will be shattered into powder under the power of the cannons. At that time, no matter how high or large the city wall is, it will be a dead end. If you want to change Li Zicheng's defensive strategy, it's impossible to do it with just lip service. You have to use a victory to tell him that the Qing army is also human and can be defeated. We can't fight anymore, we can't fight anymore. Li Zicheng put away his knife and walked past Li Zijing in a daze, saying as he walked. Promotion agenda. Li Zijing's heart trembled as it was time to agree on the defense. Update time, 1 chapter on the first day. Starting tomorrow, at 8:01 a.m. and 6:01 p.m. 10,000 coins, 1 more chapter the next day. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Doubts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Doubts. Dark clouds cover the full moon, faintly visible. The city was in ruins, with scattered corpses lying on the flat river amidst rocky terrain. Banners, knives, and guns were scattered upside down, and even the yellow river was dyed red. The crackling sound of the campfire became the only sound inside Tongguan. The Dashun soldiers who fled back to the pass were all silently curled up in the ruins, with each person's face filled with fatigue and despair. After the defeat of Shanhaiguan, they retreated all the way from the capital to Shaanxi, and the failure had become a consensus in everyone's hearts, naturally leading to a lack of military morale. The current Dashun army is no longer the new royal army that overthrew the Ming Dynasty 9 months ago. Tongguan General's Mansion. Li Zicheng sat facing north and south, with a red-brown sword stained with blood standing at his feet. Li Zijing stood one step forward on the right side, while 2 advisors were in the same position on the opposite side. In addition, there were various generals from the field 5 battalions of the Dashun army. Half of these generals were dressed in light blue arrow coats over armor, and they were from the Zhongquan loyalist army directly under Li Zicheng. After the establishment of the government in Xiangyang, the Dashun army planned the establishment of 5 main battalions. The Zhongquan Pro Army, the front camp, the rear camp, the left camp, and the right camp. The generals of the other 4 battalions wore arrow coats over their armor, which differed from the Zhongquan Pro Army only in color. After losing the battle, everyone remained silent and the atmosphere was very oppressive. The 2 advisors who used to be the most talkative now pretend to be mute. A burly general dressed in a white arrow coat received a hat and helmet, revealing a shocking knife wound on his face. He knelt down on the ground with a thud. I was defeated by Qinggo. As a pioneer, I failed to break through his camp and willingly accepted the punishment. As expected by Li Zijing, Lu Fangliang was the first to step forward. Li Zicheng immediately stood up and walked down to help Lu Fangliang, saying, "It's not the fault of Xiao. Duoduo's Manchu protectorate is very strong, and even if I go there personally, I haven't been able to get any advantage." After being lifted up, Lu Fangliang sandwiched his hat under his elbow and armpit, and deep in his eyes, a sharp light flashed past before quickly approaching. Tonight, the moonlight is dim, and the clear dog has just won. It must be relaxed and complacent. Let me take my brothers from the old camp to charge again. Li Zicheng let out a long sigh and paced restlessly. I have 80,000 soldiers in formation in front of the pass, but I cannot break through its barriers yet. The Qing army is so brave, so it is better not to let our brothers' lives be wasted. Li Zijing's eyes twitched slightly, hesitating. Although he had the identity of Li Zicheng's 3rd younger brother first, he had no military achievements, no prestige, and no support from the legitimate army. Speaking rashly will only provoke ridicule and ridicule from everyone. But if Lu Fangliang doesn't speak now and goes rampaging outside the Qing army camp like in history, it's no different from waiting to die. After a moment of awkwardness, Li Zijing suddenly turned around. I have something to say. The words fell to the ground, and everyone's eyes met in unison as they looked over. Li Zijing was being watched up close by so many people for the first time, and immediately felt an invisible pressure, making his heart involuntarily nervous. Li Zicheng also looked at his own younger brother with a puzzled expression on his face. My younger brother, please speak up. Li Zicheng is still very familiar with his younger brother. In his impression, since joining Chuangying a few years ago, his younger brother has never shown any outstanding performance, nor has he ever made any suggestions when discussing war strategies. If it weren't for his repeated rescue efforts, I'm afraid he would have died at the hands of the official army long ago. He just didn't know that Li Zijing, who is now, doesn't seem to have changed in appearance, but deep down he is no longer his original third brother. Without turning the bow, Li Zijing let out a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. The commander of this Qing army is called Duoduo, who is extremely brave and skilled in battle. I think he will set up an ambush in advance, waiting for us to take the bait, and cannot be forcefully charged. This sentence immediately stirred up 1,000 waves. Everyone in the Dashun army knows that although Li Zijing was the third brother of Emperor Yongchang, also known as the Little Chuang King, he had never experienced any brutal battles. Most people's first reaction to Li Zijing's suggestion is disdainful. Damn it! A strong man with a beard all over his face, dressed in a light blue arrow coat, and a face full of flesh, sneered incessantly. What is this place, a vegetable market? Listen to a doll who has never led a soldier talking nonsense. The speaker was General Quan Lu Zongmin, who was undoubtedly the second person in the Dashun army, with a slightly lower reputation than Li Zicheng. In a sense, he can even be on an equal footing with Li Zicheng. Lu Zongmin's words have been widely accepted by the majority of people, although no one dares to speak so bluntly, they are still constantly nodding and discussing. In their view, such words were simply sensational and they all came forward to refute them. Duoduo is skilled in warfare. We have been fighting for many years and have repeatedly defeated the official army. Is he inferior to him? Xiao Chuang Wang, don't let the ambition of a clear dog grow, destroy the prestige of my Dashun. It was not surprising for Li Zijing to have such a one-sided scene. With one's own prestige and momentum, it is difficult to suppress generals like Lu Zongmin who have emerged from the sea of corpses and blood, let alone others. Amidst the mocking voices of the crowd, Li Zijing stepped forward and bravely looked at one of them. You say you're not inferior to Dodo, but do you surpass him on the battlefield? Even if it's better than once. Li Zijing bravely finished shouting and was surprised to find that these group of murderous Dashun generals were all silent. The Dashun general who was named had a timid expression on his face. So, Li Zijing became more confident and gradually raised his voice. If Duoduo sets up an ambush outside the camp, it will be to let those old camps die for nothing. Rampage forward, is this your tactic? Everyone was speechless, but it wasn't because they were convinced by Li Zijing, it was just because what he said was indeed correct. Duoduo, with 50,000 soldiers, blocked 80,000 Dashun soldiers from leaving Tongguan. How did Duoduo make the 8 banners guard unexpectedly appear on the flank of the Dashun army during the great defeat during the day? Many people can't figure it out now. At this moment, a dead duck's mouth is hard, it's like hitting its own face. Hee hee. A cold laugh, particularly abrupt. Lu Zongmin opened his mouth and was about to say something when he caught a glimpse of Li Zicheng with an unhappy expression from the corner of his eye. He then changed his mind with a cold expression. Chuang Wang, just let your brother rob the camp. I see he can definitely defeat Duoduo and fight a beautiful victory. Li Zicheng's face was as cold as frost, and he could naturally hear the strong killing intent in Lu Zongmin's words. Since the defeat of Shanhaiguan, Li Zicheng has fled all the way, abandoning Jifu first and then Shaanxi, even neglecting his hometown of Meiji. Now only the third brother Li Zijing and his wife Gao Guiying are left to be considered blood relatives. Half a month ago, the main force of the Dashun army marched eastward and launched a counterattack in the Huaiqing campaign. With great momentum, they successively recaptured lost territories and killed the Qing army's General Jin Yu, along with Deputy General Chang Ding, and General Chen Guokai. Although the Huaiqing campaign won, it forced Dorgan to shift his strategic goals. Compared to the fiercely competitive Hongguang small court in a corner of Pianan, the Dashun led by Li Zicheng is clearly the real obstacle to its dominance in the world. So, Dorgan immediately diverted Duoduo, who had originally attacked Nanjing, all the way west, and Huaiqing took Tongguan. On the other hand, Ajij fought against the Dashun army stationed in Yan'an, intending to attack Xi'an from Yan'an to the south. In addition, there are several sources of the Qing army's main source constantly shifting westward. Once Yan'an was lost, Li Zicheng's hometown of Meiji would not have any support from the Dashun army. At that time, they will inevitably suffer from the slaughter of the Qing army, and it will be difficult for chickens and dogs to stay. Li Zicheng gathered his main force and advanced northward, risking everything to come to Tongguan and engage in a decisive battle with the Qing army of Duoduo, in order to concentrate his superior forces to first defeat the entire route and then rescue Yan'an. But for the first time in battle today, due to the failure to inspect the terrain outside Tongguan in advance, the military advantage of the Dashun army was not fully utilized, resulting in a major loss. After his defeat during the day, Li Zicheng no longer had much hope of defeating the Qing army, and he knew that he would risk his life by robbing the camp. He must never lose his only brother again. General Quan laughed, "My younger brother has never led a soldier, so there's no need to mention this matter again." Everyone burst into laughter, thinking that this farce was over. Li Zijing remained silent for a moment, took a deep breath, and spoke in a deep tone. "Brother, let me go." Li Zijing had no intention of opposing Lu Zongmin or anyone else, and he didn't want to be any savior. He just wanted to survive in this chaotic world where people's lives were like grass. This is the only hope, so he won't give up easily. Li Zicheng was slightly taken aback, staring at his younger brother whom he didn't quite know. He stared into Li Zijing's eyes and read many expressions he had never seen before. Confident and determined, Li Zijing's sudden transformation was both unexpected and somewhat unbelievable, but he quickly adjusted his emotions and sighed with emotion. "My younger brother has grown up. As my younger brother said, I will march secretly at night to prevent the Qing army from setting up an ambush." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Artifacts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Artifacts. Magnetic Weather. After everyone left, Li Zicheng stopped Lu Fangliang alone. Upon hearing this, Lu Fangliang, who was about to leave, paused and his fists tightened and loosened before finally turning around. "Your Majesty knows the prowess of the Qinggo cavalry. Tonight, I lead my elite cavalry to rob the camp and engage in fierce battles, but I don't care about the little Chuang Wan." Li Zicheng looked at the backs of Lu Zongmin and others outside the hall, and their recent ridicule and discussion echoed in the lobby of the general's mansion. "How many people do you need?" 1,000 old camp elite riders. Lu Fangliang replied with a resounding voice, but his anger was not diminished. "This camp robbery was a near death, and I had to bring such a dragging oil bottle, which made things worse. Now I'm afraid even I won't be able to escape unscathed. I'll give you 1,500 old camp elite cavalry. The weapons, supplies, and armor inside the pass, as long as you like them, you can choose from them." Li Zicheng's attitude change surprised Lu Fangliang. The veteran soldiers are the foundation on which Li Zicheng relies for survival. They are the notorious old bandits passed down by the Ming and Qing armies. They are composed of veteran soldiers who have been fighting for many years and are extremely precious. Due to having the best equipment and the most food, loyalty is paramount. It was precisely through these old camps that Li Zicheng had been fighting with him for many years that he was able to repeatedly suppress and not eliminate them, and in the blink of an eye, he was able to respond to 100 calls, with a crowd of millions. Li Zicheng's style has always been to abandon 10,000 refugees rather than give up an old camp. The Shanhaiguan army was defeated, and the Dashun old camp suffered heavy damage. This non-renewable resource is even more precious. It can be seen that this time, he really wants to protect Li Zicheng. The combat effectiveness of the elite cavalry in the old camp is comparable to that of the Manchurian Protectorate, not comparable to ordinary soldiers. They carry an additional 500 people, which is more useful than 10,000 refugees. Li Zicheng paced back and forth a few steps, his gaze deep. At present, the battle at Tongguan is tight, and it is difficult to protect Miji's hometown. Tonight during the raid, we must bring back our self-respect alive. I only have this little brother left. After some knee-to-knee conversations, it was evident that Li Zicheng was not optimistic about this night raid. Lu Fangliang couldn't continue to evade and always wanted to give face to Emperor Yongchang, so he had to clench his fists and shout. Your Majesty, thank you. Watching Lu Fangliang leave, Li Zicheng sighed heavily. Outside the general's mansion, dark clouds cover the area. The discussion is just a burning incense, and the night becomes even darker. General Lu. Li Zicheng stepped into the Xinji warehouse and saw the burly Lu Fangliang at a glance. This is the arsenal used by the Ming army in Tongguan to store firearms, knives, guns, and armor. Lu Fangliang is replacing the original cloth armor with cotton armor. Night raid operations are mainly focused on being lightweight and less likely to make noise, with border army cotton armor being more suitable. Lu Fangliang kept moving his hands and casually said. Is there anything else? Li Zicheng showed his respect with a smile. Has General Lu heard of the Fire Dragon God book? Lu Fangliang's tone was cold and indifferent, as if he was rejecting people thousands of miles away. I haven't heard of it before. Li Zicheng also knew that although Lu Fangliang was forced by Li Zicheng to agree not to make a direct surprise attack, Lu Fangliang had the final say in how to fight. If he had to rush over with people like in history, then Li Zicheng couldn't stop him. Do your best and listen to fate. Li Zicheng sorted his mind and said calmly. The Fire Dragon Divine Book is a military book of the Ming army, which specifically records two types of looting weapons. The Flying Cloud Thunderbolt Cannon and the Burning Sky Flame Unblocking Cannon. I saw in the book that Qi Jiguang had used these two types of firearms multiple times to rob the camp, but he never lost. I think there must be something powerful about our army's looting. It's best to bring some firearms when clearing the fire. In history, Lu Fangliang was an extremely loyal and righteous person. After Li Zicheng died in Jiugong Mountain, he raised the banner of Lianming and firmly resisted the Qing Dynasty until his death in battle. Li Zicheng believes that as long as he speaks well, he should still follow the advice. Lu Fangliang had already put on the entire cotton armor and covered it with a black arrow coat. He squinted his eyes and looked up and down at Li Zicheng, but soon a smirk appeared on his face. When did you become literate? Li Zicheng was suddenly startled and realized that his original background as a rice-fat farmer in history was actually illiterate. He quickly calmed down and tried to appear normal. General Lu thinks that if I don't participate in the war on weekdays, what are I doing? Lu Fangliang was momentarily taken aback when asked in reverse, and upon second thought, he realized that he was right. After all, for many years, this little adventurer has been staying in the camp and not participating in the war. Can't he just sleep all day long? Got it. Lu Fangliang's attitude has not changed much, and his response is as sincere as gold. Li Zicheng was not surprised. After all, he had no achievements in his original body, and it was obviously difficult to win over the public with a name that had no real name. Li Zicheng shook his head, without much hope, and lifted his foot out of the Xinji warehouse. It seems that we can only rely on ourselves, wait outside the Tongguan Pass, and then observed the ambush positions of the Qing army. Since Duoduo has arranged an ambush in advance, there must be some room for maneuver. That night, the moon is dark and the wind is high. Li Zijing, wearing a black waist-tied arrow coat and cotton armor confiscated from a soldier on the Ming border, leaned against a large stone 2 miles outside the east gate of Tongguan and slowly wiped his hat and helmet. Li Zijing occasionally looked into the distance, observing any movement in the area. As I looked up, a strong wind blew past me. Under the confusion of the yellow soil, Li Zijing had to use a hat and helmet to block his eyes, only feeling that the sky was touching the ground one after another, turning into a piece of earthy yellow. Yellow sand rises all over the sky, wrapping one person and one horse in the yellow soil. Jinduguan is the eastern gate of Tongguan. If the Qing army wanted to attack Tongguan, they had to cross the 20-mile-long Yuanwang Gully, otherwise they could only launch a strong attack on Jinduguan. From afar, the valley is connected by mountains, peaks are connected by peaks, and the valley is deep and steep. The mountain is high and the road is narrow, with a narrow path that only accommodates one carriage and one horse. The terrain of Yuanwangu is very unfavorable for the army to expand, and the terraced soil plateau is a natural barrier layer by layer. The Dashun army can attack the Qing army passing through the ditch from a high position, which can be said to be difficult for 10,000 soldiers to overcome. Although there are also slightly gentle areas within the ditch that allow people to pass through, unless they are familiar locals, they are easily lost and unable to escape. During the Enraged rebellion of the Tang Dynasty, Enraged abandoned Yuanwangu and launched a strong attack on Jindo Pass. Gao Xianji remained steadfast in defense, ultimately leading to Enraged's defeat and return. Duoduo was a flag-bearer with outstanding military achievements in the Qing army, who had rich experience in battle. He chose to camp several miles west of Yuanwangu, on the plain of Natuyuan, about 20 miles away from the east gate of Tongguan. Jinduguan, also known as Tongguan First Fortress, was built south of Yuanwang Gully and north of the Yellow River, serving as the first obstacle for the Qing army to enter Shaanxi. Today, during the day, 80,000 Dashun soldiers lined up near the Jindo Pass, hoping to concentrate their superior forces and take advantage of the danger of the pass to engage in a decisive battle with the Qing army. But from the Qing army camp to the outside of Jindo Pass, there were corridors and gullies about 5 miles long, and the roads were not wide. The Qing army's offensive was not conducive to progress, and the Dashun army took the initiative to attack, making it difficult to leverage their military advantages. Duoduo was aware of this, so he remained steadfast after arriving outside Tongguan. Li Zijing knows what Duoduo is waiting for. He is waiting for Kong Yud's red barbarian cannon. In the late Ming and early Qing dynasties, after all, it was an era of the rise of firearms, and even the most solid and steep pass could not withstand the successive barrage of heavy artillery attacking the city. In the Dashun army, there were light copper and iron cannons captured by the Ming army in the Guanyi region, and very few Fo Lang machines. Turning 1,000 miles, the slightly heavier artillery was abandoned, and now the Dashun army has no firearms in their hands that can threaten weapons like the Hongyi artillery. Once 13 days later, the Qing army's red barbarian cannons arrived at Tongguan, and even though the Dashun army had a dangerous and majestic pass, they could only passively be attacked. To make Li Zicheng believe that taking the initiative can lead to victory, tonight is the last chance. We must seize any movement, and the earlier we discovered what was ambush, the better. But along the way from Yuanwang Gully to the Qing army camp, there are numerous gullies, and any ambush could be set up. Where would Duoduo set up the ambush? A slow sound of footsteps came from his side, interrupting Li Zijing's slightly chaotic mood. Lu Fangliang walked out of Jindo Pass, with his hands clasped around his chest and leaning against Li Zijing's side. He gazed at the night sky for a moment before turning his head to look over. I have seen these 2 types of old cannons in the Shinji warehouse, and there are still many that can be used. I have transported 200 each to the Yuanwang Gully to hide them. Can they really be useful? Li Zijing was also gazing into the distance, and when he heard these words, his face froze. I didn't expect that Lu Fangliang was completely indifferent at the time, but he had secretly taken it to heart. Fire Dragon Artifacts. Stealing Fire Dragon Artifacts. The cannon is made of cast iron, which is as large as a bowl, round as a ball, and contains half a liter of divine fire. It is fired with a mother cannon and flies into the bandits' camp. With a thunderbolt, the flames ignite. If 10 cannons are fired in a row, the entire camp is filled with fire. Flying fire and divine fire are used to burn the grain fortress, while intense fire, poisonous fire, and rotten fire are used to burn people and horses. They are used randomly, and thieves will cause chaos. The roll of paper is a tube, containing 20.30 tubes of divine fire. The fires are different, either flying or walking, poisonous fire, dharma fire, jumping or jumping, flying fire, belching fire, burning food when encountering thieves, burning thieves when encountering thieves, and burning horses when encountering horses. They are sent to the bandit camp, scattered with the wind, and rushed into the eyes. The smoke and flames block the sky, burning people's hair, burning food and startling horses. The momentum is unstoppable, and if they fly into the bandit team, they will become chaotic. Taking advantage of this, they will fight hard and achieve a great victory. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Breaking the Ambush. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Breaking the Ambush. At the peak of winter, all sounds are silent. There was a hazy darkness everywhere, and the sunrise was still early. Li Zijing led his black-brown warhorse and followed Lu Fangliang to the Yuanwang Valley. Only by experiencing it firsthand can one understand why Duoduo would rather wait for Kong Yud's red barbarian cannon for 13 days than delve deeper. Along the way, the distant view of the ravine is intertwined with trees, vines, and weeds blocking the view. It is difficult to see clearly from the bottom of the ravine on the plateau, making it easy to set up ambushes. Suddenly, Lu Fangliang stopped in his tracks. "Let's all come out." The words fell to the ground, and just now, there was still no one in the distant observation ditch. In a moment, 1,500 Dashun veteran soldiers dressed in black waist-tied arrow robes appeared. Some people hide behind trees, some hide under terraces, and some hide among shrubs. They, like Lu Fangliang, had already replaced their arrow coats with cotton armor before the night attack, which not only prevented excessive noise but also kept them warm from the cold. Li Zijing widened his eyes and watched as an old camp member stood up from the bushes at his feet, feeling a sigh of unconsciousness in his heart. The weather at the end of December, being inside the Guanyi Pass, is equally chilly at night. The veteran soldiers of Dashun have never experienced such cold weather before, and many of them have been shivering from the cold. This bird weather is so cold in Guangzhou. Lu Fangliang spat out. "Xiaochuang Wan, do you have any military books you have read over the years about cavalry robbing camps?" After recalling for a while, Li Zijing finally said. "Yes. A person carries a coin, a horse wraps its hooves." Lu Fangliang frowned and repeated a few words in a low voice. "A person carries a coin, a horse wraps its hooves." What do the first 3 words mean? Li Zijing looked around and walked to the tree, breaking off a small branch and gesturing to himself. "March at night and have everyone bite on the branches to avoid making noise." Lu Fangliang smiled and shook his head, then lifted his eyes and looked around. The ditch is winding, and it's not easy for horses to walk. If a clear dog sets its ambush on the slope, it will be on the slope. Then we will really be barking every day and not responding, and the ground will not work properly. There are really ambushes, haven't they been killed long ago? The old camp of Dashun has been fighting for many years and has set up ambushes several times to defeat the official army. However, I have never heard of the principle of marching and fighting by biting the branches of a tree. They started whispering and no one thought it would be of any use. Li Zijing didn't pay attention to the strange looks coming from around, and knew that talking too much was useless. He bit on the branch and walked slowly up the slope, leading his horse. If Li Zijing wanted to command the army, Lu Fangliang would definitely not pay attention, but in his opinion, it was just a bite on a branch, and Emperor Yongchang still had to give face. Lu Fangliang was quite helpless. After thinking for a while, he turned around and gave the order. Let everyone bite onto the branches, wrap the hooves in cotton cloth before leaving the ditch. Due to the fact that this was a night-time covert march, orders could not be sounded and could only be transmitted by manpower. The team of 1,500 people was not many, but they were distributed in a narrow and long distance within the Yuanwang Valley. It took some time to reach the ears of the veteran soldiers on both sides from Lu Fangliang's location. However, the veteran soldiers are still the elite of the Dashun army. Lu Fangliang joined the border army in his early years and was one of the earliest Dashun generals to follow Li Zicheng, with high prestige. When I heard his orders, I followed them without saying a word. Quickly, all the hooves of the horses were wrapped in a layer of cotton cloth, and 1,500 veteran soldiers were biting short branches and leading their horses towards the distant observation ditch. Li Zijing held a horse with one hand and pushed away numerous vines and shrubs from the bottom of the ditch. Some of the paths were narrow and could only accommodate one person and one horse, which was quite laborious. Fortunately, I have been accompanying the camp for many years and my physical strength is still decent. But at the same time, Li Zijing was also observing the situation around him. Lu Fangliang's marching plan has changed from a barbaric assault in history to a covert night attack at present. As long as he can discover the location of the Qing army's ambush, he has a full chance to quietly touch the back of the Qing army's ambush and seize the opportunity. Lu Fangliang's view is correct. If Duoduo sets up an ambush in advance, the best place would be on the Yuanwang Gully. But along the way, the slope remained silent without any movement. The old camp has already climbed the Yuanwang Gully, leading their horses slowly towards the Qing army camp. As time passed, Li Zijing could already see a hint of annoyance on the faces of some veteran camp members, just because he was biting on a branch and couldn't even curse loudly. Lu Fangliang also began to regret why he didn't directly lead people to charge the Qing army camp, fighting fiercely for a day. It was impossible for Duoduo to set up ambushes. You shouldn't listen to this little adventurer's nonsense and do some covert night raids. If we had fought according to our own ideas, perhaps we had already unexpectedly broken through the Qing army camp. Li Zijing's forehead, wearing a hat and helmet, gradually grew fine beads of sweat, feeling uneasy. He murmured, "Ambush, ambush, where are you hiding?" It is about 5 miles from Yuanwanggo to the Qing army's camp. I have been walking forward for so long, but there has been no movement at all. Is the historical record wrong? Looking at the ditch from afar, the view is broad. The steep walls of Natuyuan extend into a series of gullies, dotted with wild grass and vines, intertwined with exposed mounds of soil, creating an indescribable desolation. Li Zijing looked around with extreme eyes, his gaze brushing several times over the gully under the Natuyuan, but he didn't pay attention. Suddenly, a group of panicked antelopes jumped out of the ditch. Li Zijing's expression shook, and his restless gaze froze. The 5 words from Sun Tzu's Art of War suddenly came to mind. Beast scarers, cover up. Will Duoduo's ambush hide at the bottom of the ditch? In an instant, Li Zijing understood why Lu Fangliang was ambushed in history. No one thinks that the Qing army would set up an ambush immediately after daytime combat, and the second and most important thing is that Duoduo's sword deviated. He chose the least likely place to set up an ambush. It is precisely this series of gullies under the Nyoto Plateau. Gully is a terrain with a downward depression, with sloping loess slopes on both sides, and in some places it is even deeper, making it easy for people and horses to get stuck, making it a natural dead end. Once the army is trapped, it will be as difficult to come up with a solution, and no one will actively dive into the grave. It is likely that Duoduo carefully explored the nearby terrain before and after arriving at Tongguan, and had a detailed analysis of the combat tactics of the Dashun army before setting up an ambush under the gully. This is a big gamble. Historical facts have proven that Dodo did indeed make the right bet. From Li Zicheng to the night attack General Lu Fangliang, no one in Dashun felt that the Qing army would set up an ambush outside the camp after a day of fierce fighting. I will not consciously explore the gullies that stretch for more than 10 miles under the Nyoto Plateau. There is an ambush. Li Zijing turned around and pulled out his goose feather sword with a thud. If the historical records are accurate, the only possible ambush for the Qing army's camp would be at the foot of this gully. Under the pitch-black night sky, these two words were like a thunderbolt, suddenly hitting the head of the veteran soldier. Everyone's mind trembled, and their footsteps instinctively paused. Where is the ambush? Lu Fangliang pulled out his sword and stared around with wide eyes. At the bottom of the ravine, a group of antelopes are running in panic. There must be enemy troops lurking. The dark clouds dispersed and the moonlight shone. Lu Fangliang tightly grasped the handle of the knife with one hand and looked in the direction of Li Zijing's fingers. After staring for a while, his eyes suddenly tightened. Prepare for battle. Gully ahead, shoot arrows. The veteran camps are all veterans who have been fighting for many years, and some reactions are ingrained in their bones. Although not many people noticed the moonlight and flickering knife light at the bottom of the gully, they still acted according to military orders, as if facing a great enemy. Xiu. There were a considerable number of archers in the old camp who could shoot bows. They immediately arched and threw a rain of arrows at the bottom of the ditch. In the central plains, soft bows and long arrows were the standard equipment of the Ming army. The manufacturing process of weapons by the Dashun army was not yet mature, and the old camp also uniformly used the Kaiyuan bows confiscated from the Ming border army. The bow surface of the Kaiyuan bow is narrow and prone to rolling arrows, making it very suitable for throwing. After a round of shooting, the scene suddenly quieted down. The old camp of the Dashun army looked at each other, and many people still don't understand why they had to expose their whereabouts suddenly after smearing and advancing for so long. At the bottom of the gully, there was still no sign of ambush. A round of arrow rain passed by among the old camp, and there was not even a single sound coming out. Lu Fangliang frowned and slowly put down his sword, feeling puzzled. Did you misread the flickering light? At the next moment, countless shouts of killing erupted at the bottom of the ditch. The Qing army, wearing helmets and armor, had already gritted their teeth and climbed to the top of the ditch against the arrows of the Dashun army, waving steel knives and charging towards the old camp with open teeth and claws. Mao Yuan's General Essentials of the Martial Arts Classic, the yellow birch bow, black lacquer bow, white birch bow, and Ma Bei bow, although their names are different, are actually the same. Today, the Kaiyuan bow is made of strong and durable materials, which are commonly used by the nine-sided generals, and are most commonly known as sharp weapons. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Poisonous Fire. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Poisonous Fire. There are really ambushes. Lu Fangliang finally realized that he had not misread the flashing knife light at the bottom of the ditch just now. Brothers, follow me on my horse. With a command, hundreds of veteran soldiers turned over and mounted their horses, their swords gleaming with cold light. A yellow dragon banner suddenly rose, and just now, without anyone else rushing down the ditch, countless Qing soldiers crawled out like ants, all fierce and angry. Li Zijing's heart trembled as he watched this scene. I have seen many crowded battle scenes in movies and TV dramas in the past, but no matter how many I have watched, the shock brought by this personal experience is not as great. The Qing army discovered that the ambush was exposed, so they immediately climbed up the ditch without giving the hesitant Lu Fangliang too much exploration time. In the blink of an eye, they were already in front of them. The front line was originally a right-wing old camp of the Dashun army, which had already been engaged in battle with the Qing army. Fortunately, Li Zijing reminded us early that the right-wing old camp of Dashun was not caught off guard by the Qing army, who crawled to their feet without any preparation. Swords and shadows collide fiercely with each other. After each breath, there are fresh lives lying in the pool of blood, never able to stand up again. On the quiet ditch just now, the shouting of killing was already deafening. Even Li Zijing's mount, holding the reins with one hand, became restless and restless. The horse's neck tilted back vigorously, its front hooves rubbed high and lifted upwards, its eyes rolled up, it stared big, its nose hummed incessantly, and it was trembling. The law of lamentation. Listening to the incessant screams in his ears, Li Zijing's mind went blank. He held on to the reins tightly with one hand, his legs unconsciously weakening and retreating. The knowledge of historical materials learned by later generations can help Li Zijing anticipate the enemy first, but cannot help him kill the enemy face-to-face. On the real and brutal battlefield, even the tightly held goose feather sword in hand cannot provide any sense of security. Whether Li Zijing can win these fierce Qing soldiers or not is completely uncertain in his heart. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. Regret. Why do you want to get involved and escape and live in seclusion in the deep mountains and forests? Even if you are eventually caught and executed by Kangxi, it's better to die on the battlefield now. People want warmth when it's cold, but when it's too hot, they feel that it's better to die cold than to die hot. The endless sense of fear has completely overwhelmed Li Zijing, and all his bold words have been forgotten. Li Zijing, who had never killed a single chicken in later generations, had no choice but to rush into the crowd with a knife and fight against the Qing soldiers like those old camps. The thought of wanting to retreat in the face of battle immediately gave me a feeling of the vastness of heaven and earth. The world is vast, where can't we avoid it? Why do we have to confront the Qing dynasty? They are all Manchu soldiers. During the battle, the old camp of Dashun on the right wing showed signs of retreat, and the casualties were clearly not proportional to those of the Qing army. Someone turned their head and shouted, wanting to remind the back line, but in the blink of an eye, they were chopped to the ground in front of Li Zijing. I saw him lying limply in a pool of blood, with uncontrollable spasms and convulsions all over his body. Before he could fully die, he was crushed into flesh by the rushing Qing soldiers. Manchu soldiers, formerly also known as Jurchen people. There have always been rumors in the Ming army that the Jurchens were dissatisfied with 10,000 and were invincible. Many of the Dashun army were once Ming soldiers, and with their defeat, they had long been defeated by these Manchu soldiers. The quality of the old camp is not much worse than that of the Manchu soldiers, but the armor and weapons are vastly different, and the fighting spirit is not high. The old camp in Dashun was just a uniform with cotton armor and arrow clothing, while the Manchu soldiers lurking here were all heavily armored, revealing only a pair of chilling eyes. The wild goose feather sword in the hands of the old camp often only brings out a trail of sparks when chopping at the chest of Manchu soldiers, and the damage it can cause is very limited. To gain the upper hand, it requires very skilled skills. All those lurking under the ravine are Manchu protectors, the most elite of the 8 banners. Li Zijing's breath suddenly quickened, his gaze swept over the bloody battlefield, but he inadvertently met a Manchurian soldier not far away. After several battles, the iron helmet on the Manchurian soldier's head had disappeared, and behind his head was a nauseating money rat tail. His braids were stained black with blood, and he was wiping the blood from the corners of his mouth with his hand. Seemingly sensing something, the Manchurian soldier suddenly lifted his head and stared at Li Zijing with a ferocious smile. A murderous aura rushed towards Li Zijing's face, and he couldn't bear to fight such a desperate person with his life. He turned around and was about to escape, but was entangled by vines under his feet and fell to the ground. Li Zijing turned around and searched again, only to be horrified to find that the Manchurian soldier had disappeared from the crowd just now. Lu Fangliang's eyes narrowed slightly, tightly gripping the horse knife in his hand. He didn't expect that this little adventurer, who had never experienced any battle, could have foreseen the ambush position of the Qing army in advance. Lu Fangliang sat on a horse, watching Li Zijing, who was about to flee in a panic, shake his head slightly, and bend down to give a command to an old camp. Then he urged the mount and raised his sword, shouting loudly, "Kill the dog!" Horseshoe treading on the yellow soil, Lu Fangliang held the reins with one hand, allowing the blade like strong wind to blow sand and soil on his face, leading the elite cavalry of the old camp to quickly form a cavalry formation. The elite cavalry of the old camp in Dashun used this cavalry tactic to defeat countless Ming armies in the Central Plains. They went uphill from the left and then, like a huge wave opening a gate, poured down with a loud roar, hitting the flank of the Qing army. No matter how thick the armor is, it cannot withstand the charging of the cavalry like a wall. Although there are only a few hundred elite riders, the killing power of colliding into the crowd together is still enough to destroy the formation. Moreover, the Qing army was discovered in ambush and had to launch an early attack. There were also many people who were unable to climb up at the bottom of the ditch in time, and there was no formation to speak of in a hurry. The most flanking Qing army turned around and was soon entangled by the walking Dashun old camp on the front. They turned around and fought for a few breaths, and the elite cavalry of the old camp on the side followed closely. Riding lightly with a sharp sword, the momentum of the horse's impact was strong and heavy. A muffled groan and mournful howl suddenly sounded. Some Qing soldiers were caught off guard and flew several steps away, fiercely hitting the Qing soldiers who had just climbed into the ditch, rolling down together. But at the same time, more and more Qing soldiers climbed up the gully and filled it in. Kill! Lu Fangliang had already replaced his sword with an iron gun during the charge, and rushed into the crowd ahead of him, taking a shot away from the Qing soldiers in front of him, and then looked towards the bottom of the ditch. At the bottom of the gully below Natuyuan, there are still dozens of Qing soldiers wearing heavy armor slowly climbing upwards. Lu Fangliang understood that the number of Qing soldiers lurking here was not many, probably only a few hundred, but their ability to engage in close combat was extremely strong, and they could not easily climb the top of the slope. We need to find a way to solve the Qing army that hasn't climbed up yet. He suddenly remembered that Li Zijing had brought many firearms with him during the raid, which happened to come in handy. The so-called thunderbolt cannon, similar in shape to a small mountain cannon, can be carried forward by one person, and can also be used alone when encountering enemies. Rather than being a cannon, a paper ball that can be thrown by a single person is more appropriate. Its roll of paper is a cylinder, the size of which is the same as a bowl, and it contains gunpowder. When thrown and dropped, it will explode, burn people, and burn villages. Both of these are the looting weapons used by the Qi family army. Throw it away. Lu Fangliang held an unstoppable cannon hanging by the saddle in his hand, weighed its weight, and threw it into the ditch. The elite cavalry of the old camp were not fond of war either. Upon hearing the words, they scattered their horses and left. The Qing army was dressed in heavy armor, and behind them were the walking Dashun army fighting and chasing after them for a few steps before returning. On the way out, the elite cavalry of the old camp also took out paper balls and threw them like raindrops towards the gully. The paper ball was thrown down the slope and crashed into a huge rock, exploding like a blossoming bomb. Although there was a lot of movement, it bounced off the Qing army's armor and could not cause any damage. Lu Fangliang furrowed his brows, already devoid of any hope for court firearms, and now his face was filled with sneer. General Ji. Lu Fangliang had just turned his head when he heard a call. He turned around and looked, his face full of shock. The reason why the unstoppable cannon was dubbed as a divine weapon for robbing camps by the Ming army in military records is precisely because its power is completely incomparable to ordinary firearms. The true purpose of exploding paper balls is not to harm people with flames, but to ignite them everywhere. The fireball was ejected by the Qing army's armor, but it quickly ignited the vines and withered grass visible everywhere at the bottom of the slope, forming a poisonous miasma. Dozens of unstoppable cannons fell, and the fire erupted rapidly. At this moment, the Qing army at the bottom of the ditch also realized that something was not quite right and began to work hard to extinguish the fire. Unable to extinguish the fire, he would shoot a bow and arrow upwards and curse loudly in Manchu. After all, there is a distance to go up from the gully, and the Qing army mostly used hard bows, which are conducive to direct shooting. The Dashun cavalry threw unstoppable guns at the top of the slope, which had a natural advantage and only needed to dodge slightly. Due to the downward depression of the gully terrain, the smoke and miasma were not easily dispersed. No matter how hard the Qing soldiers tried, the fire did not decrease but instead increased. As a result, the smoke and miasma quickly spread, and dozens of Qing soldiers at the bottom of the slope were quickly enveloped. The Qing soldiers who smelled the miasma all had weak hands and feet, and their minds were dizzy. No matter how strong their hands were, they could not grasp the slope. Just now, those dirty and despicable Manchu words gradually turned into mournful cries of despair before death. Lu Fangliang's face was very surprised. He could see that even if these Qing soldiers at the bottom of the ditch were not immediately poisoned, they would not pose any threat to him anymore. What awaits them can only be burned alive. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Duoduo. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Duoduo on the night of December 29th. In the north, tonight was supposed to be a family reunion for the Chinese New Year. As usual, both inside and outside Tongguan, at this time, lights and colorful decorations were already displayed to welcome the arrival of the new year. But now, both inside and outside Tongguan, there are large armies gathering, and the clouds of war are dense. The armies of both sides have been fighting for a whole day, with corpses piled up like mountains. After the Qing army arrived at Tongguan, they set up camp in the famous northwest village under Natuyuan, which was the only plain in front of Tongguan that could be used for large armies to camp. Before he arrived at Tongguan, Duoduo frequently dispatched vanguard cavalry to explore the terrain near Tongguan, search for and occupy areas with water sources under the Natuyuan. After the army arrived at Tongguan, they immediately dispatched personnel to control the water source to ensure that people and horses could drink water. These places used to gather many villages, but I heard that the Qing army was coming, but now they have run away completely. When the Qing army vanguard arrived, they only saw empty houses standing on the yellow soil, not a single living person, which was somewhat disappointing. On the white tent in the middle of the Qing army camp, the yellow dragon banner stands tall, with Duoduo sitting in it, his gaze deep. A guard is standing in front of him reporting the battle report. Li Gua, a pseudo-nobleman under the command of the bandits, stationed more than 100,000 troops in Yan'an to confront me and Prince Shuoying. Starting from the 25th, Prince Ing sent Wu Sangui's troops to attack several times and suffered significant losses. Tens of thousands of bandits, including Gao Yigong and Zhao Guanyuan, have taken two separate routes from Xi'an towards Pingyang and Huaiqing. Duoduo sneered and raised his hand to signal him to shut up. At the beginning of this month, as soon as our army arrived in Huaiqing, a Jige had already arrived at Meiji and slaughtered Li Zicheng's hometown completely. When it comes to this matter, Duoduo still harbors a deep hatred. Despite his great contribution, he managed to pick it up, while risking his life to gnaw on the hard bone of Tongguan. In today's battle at Jinduguan, Duoduo knew that Li Zicheng's main force was not easy to fight, at least his tens of thousands of elite soldiers were not comparable to the Ming army's group of pigs. Without the Red Barbarian cannon, whether crossing the Yuanwanggu or attacking the Jinduguan Pass, it would have to be filled with human life. Duoduo was ordered to first rescue Huaiqing and then attack Tongguan. Due to the sudden arrival, most of the Han army was still on their way, with Manchu soldiers mainly following them. To truly attack Tongguan, Geng Zhongming's tens of thousands of cannon fodder are not enough. It's been a month now, why hasn't even Yan'an been defeated? What is Azig doing? He only knows how to slaughter the city and rob women. The master looked angry and as a servant, he naturally wanted to quickly show his loyalty. Huaishuan Wang Geng Zhongming, who served as the assistant commander of the Han army's yellow banner, quickly stepped forward to comfort like a dog. Prince Yu calmed down his anger. The fake Marquis Li Gua had a reputation for breaking into the camp, known as a tiger. Prince Ing must have been afraid that the Manchu soldiers would suffer too much damage, so he dared not venture forward. Our army only needs to guard the main camp, wait for the arrival of the Red Barbarians' cannons, and then we can reach the east gate of Tongguan in Yuanwangu, standing invincible, and the bandits will cause chaos. Duoduo glanced at him, half smiling, with a cold gleam in his eyes. Do you understand the principles that even a servant dog understands? Will I not understand them? The flattery hit the horse's hooves, and Geng Zhongming immediately knelt on both knees, his face turning red. Coincidentally, a legitimate white flag guard arrived and solved his predicament. Report. Report to Prince Ing, my ambush position has been exposed. Shangshan Beizi, who is surrounded by the vanguard of the bandits' troops in a ditch 3 miles away, is surrounded by the false magnetic Ho Lu Fangliang. We are fighting hard and waiting for reinforcements. Duoduo immediately stood up, furious. What? What does Shangshan do to eat? Years of service as a servant have made Geng Zhongming feel no sense of insults from the other party, and his dignity has already been trampled on by himself when he was demoted. Geng Zhongming immediately stood up and lowered his eyebrows, saying, Shangshan has been following Prince Yu for a long time and will not make mistakes easily. It is unlikely to be so simple. Prince Yu anticipated that the enemy was ahead of him. Currently, the bandits are robbing the camp, and our army is already prepared. I am willing to lead the Han cavalry of the Zhenhuang banner to rush for reinforcements and annihilate these bandits at the foot of the plateau. Duoduo stared at him coldly for a while before getting up and walking to the map to examine. You're right. The location of the ambush was personally chosen by the king, so there won't be any mistakes. What's going on? We'll have to wait until Shangshan is rescued. The military situation was urgent, and Dodo's anger did not last long. He quickly calmed down. Since entering the border, the troops of the Manchu 8 banners have been scattered and severely damaged. The speed of catching and replenishing the savage Jurchen in the old village cannot keep up with the losses. Now, in tough battles, those from the green camp need to be used as cannon fodder. Shangshan is carrying 500 Manchurian guards, who are the elite among the 8 banners of Manchuria. The life of 100,000 Han army green camp cannot match. Duoduo's eyes were deeply sunken, scanning back and forth the map of Tongguan hanging in front of him. The previously selected ambush is located in a ravine under the Natuyuan, which is easy to attack but difficult to defend, making it a dangerous move in military tactics. It seems that Lu Fangliang has some ability to discover my king's ambush. Duoduo's eyes moved slightly, and his breath remained calm. Shangshan's situation is very dangerous. He is a descendant of the Red Flag royal family, and although his title is not high, his status is prestigious. He must immediately send someone to rescue him. Duoduo didn't care about his life or death, mainly because he was worried that Shangshan was a young man with a red flag. Once he died in battle, it would affect his stance on Deis Han and be detrimental to Doergun. Now the Qing Dynasty seems to be working together, but in reality, there is an undercurrent surging. Thinking that the Dashun army had not used any firearms on the battlefield all the way from Shanguan, Duoduo was not too anxious. The combat effectiveness of the Manchurian Protectorate is stronger than that of the old camp in Dashun. If they want to eat these 500 people without suitable firearms, they must send 10,000 people by Li Zicheng. There was such a big commotion of 10,000 people, and the sentinels and cavalry wandering outside the Jindo Pass had already noticed it. I will give you 1,000 Han soldiers yellow flag light cavalry, galloping to support Shangshan. Geng Zhongming knew that the opportunity for meritorious service had arrived, so he rubbed his hands and was eager to show off. Thank you for your trust. I will capture the pseudo-magnetic Marquis Lu Fangliang alive and present him to the horse. Geng Zhongming walked out of the camp, and soon people inside the Qing army camp shouted, "Ma Si." Due to the early preparation for robbing the camp, most of the Qing army was already dressed neatly and waiting for a command. More than 1,000 horse teams roared out, and the yellow soil covered the sky. Geng Zhongming was one of the earliest traitors to surrender to the Qing dynasty. He was en theft even earlier than Wu Sangui, and his original subordinates were already exhausted in years of battles. The more than 1,000 Han Army Yellow Flag light cavalry brought out this time were mostly composed of the original Ming army after entering the border. These people did not perform well as Ming soldiers, but after joining the Green Camp, due to sufficient pay and excellent equipment, their combat effectiveness was stronger than that of ordinary Dashun army cavalry. The distance of 3 miles is not very far. The mobilization of the Qing army was good, riding light and fast horses. Geng Zhongming quickly arrived at the left side of the ditch surrounded by Shangshan's ambush. Geng Zhongming rode up the slope to observe the battlefield, intending to find the best position to rush in and solve the battle once and for all. For the Dashun army currently in battle, their cavalry is a formidable force. But the next moment, Geng Zhongming's face was full of disbelief. Outside the gully of Natuyuan, there is a group of Dashun cavalry wandering, constantly throwing bowl-sized paper balls into the gully. Soon after passing by, thick smoke will rise. Geng Zhongming was once the Ming army, and he could see clearly that the firearms being thrown by the Dashun army were clearly the fiery and unstoppable cannons recorded in the Fire Dragon God book. This kind of unstoppable cannon explodes upon landing and burns wherever it passes, creating a highly toxic smoke. The Qi family army, who has used it before, is called a divine weapon. The Fire Dragon Divine Book is a confidential military document that even many Ming army generals are unaware of. Geng Zhongming only heard that Sun Chuanting has one in his possession, but he is not qualified to access it. The Dashun army is just a group of bandits. How did they know about this? In just this short while, the Dashun army had been divided into 2 battalions, cavalry and infantry, and surrounded the 500 Manchurian protectors who had set up ambushes near the gully. The Shangshan Manchu Protectorate was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, and they were all infantry. Suddenly, a fire broke out in the ravine, causing chaos and increasing casualties. Geng Zhongming was very clear about the intentions of the Dashun army. Under the gully was a raging fire, and they clearly wanted to force the Shangshan Manchurian Protectorate down the gully. The number of Dashun soldiers who came to rob the camp was at least twice that of Shangshan, and there was still a reserve team left behind. Geng Zhongming turned to look at the more than 1,000 light cavalry brought behind, his eyes changing and uncertain. He was very clear in his heart that the Manchurian guards in the Chongzhen could no longer be saved. Even if they were not burned to death, they would still be poisoned to death. Anyway, they were all destined to die. The Dashun army, who can compete head-on with the Manchurian Protectorate, is probably not an ordinary cavalry, but rather an elite old camp led by Li Zicheng. In the Battle of Shanhaiguan, the elite cavalry of the old camp of the Dashun army can even fight against the 8-banner iron cavalry, which is not a good thing. I'm afraid I won't be able to see enough of my 1,000 green camps. But if we just withdraw like this, judging from Dodo's cruel personality, it would be difficult for him to survive. Every follow-up reading in the new book period is extremely precious. We kindly ask everyone to help with follow-up reading. At least when you reach the last page and see unfinished to be continued, it can be considered as a follow-up reading. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Rear Hall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Rear Hall. The Qing army set the red flag on Gushan, but Shangshan did not expect that the ravine, which was originally thought to be an excellent ambush, would now become a carefully selected tomb for himself. The Dashun army went against the norm this time, choosing to march in seclusion, discovering the location of the ambush in advance, throwing a rain of arrows downwards. After learning that the ambush position was exposed, Shangshan did not panic. Instead, he led his men to climb up the ditch and charged towards the right wing of the Dashun army. The Manchu protectors were all tiger-backed and bare-backed, with a fierce face. The wide-edged goose-wing knives they used were thicker and heavier than most Ming army waist knives, and could be mixed with one hand and two hands. The Manchu protectorate often suddenly changed their grip during battles, unleashing a powerful chopping force that few could withstand off guard. Although the quality of the old camp in Dashun is good, its strength and armor protection are not as good as those of the Manchurian guards. Many people were knocked to the ground by the fierce Manchurian guards in front of each other, howling uncontrollably. If it weren't for Lu Fangliang quickly commanding the rear cavalry to dismount and replace them with infantry, the right wing would have been almost pierced through by a rapid assault by the Manchurian protectorate. The Dashun army came to rob the camp this time, with a total of 1,500 old soldiers, which is 500 more than in history. They have an absolute advantage in terms of numbers and terrain. Due to Li Zijing's timely reminder, he even took the lead. Unable to disperse the formation of the Dashun army at once, Chongzhen knew that this battle was difficult. Stabilize the formation and stop charging. Prince Yu's reinforcements will arrive soon. Chongzhen shouted loudly in the hope of boosting morale and commanding the Manchurian defenders to retreat. But the old camp of Dashun on the right wing has stabilized its position. These old camps, mounted with elite cavalry and dismounted with elite infantry, are much more difficult to deal with than ordinary Dashun troops. More and more old camps are dismounting and joining the battle from the rear. Lu Fangliang is also leading hundreds of cavalry to continuously attack the flank of the Manchurian protectorate. But the last straw that crushed these Manchu protectors was still the unsettling screams coming from behind. Chongzhen's gaze swept over the entire battlefield, and his fighting spirit suddenly plummeted to the bottom. As far as he could see, there was a dark and overwhelming army of Dashun. These bandits were like moths to the fire, fearlessly charging towards him. The fire under the gully was unstoppable, illuminating the entire battlefield like daylight. Several thick smoke billowed up, and the crackling sound of the burning vines and plants mixed with desperate screams made the Manchurian defenders who heard it restless. Dozens of Manchurian guards who had not climbed up in time were trapped at the bottom of the ditch, their screams of helplessness and despair. The bottom of the ditch now is like a Shura hell. The sound of killing was deafening. The flames accompanied by screams made people's hearts and minds tremble. Blood slid down the tip of the Yan Ling sword, and Li Zijing's hand, tightly gripping the sword, trembled uncontrollably. He looked at the corpses of the Manchurian protectorate and the old camp under his feet, and suddenly came to his senses. At the next moment, a sharp pain came from the left shoulder. A shocking knife cut pierced through the arrow coat and cotton armor leaf lining, blood flowing down the skin beneath the armor. Just now, the sharp teeth of the Manchurian protector were still vividly visible. If it weren't for the veteran camp dragging down the Qing soldiers, it would be oneself lying here. In both past and present lives, this was Li Zijing's first time killing someone. Li Zijing can't remember what happened just now, he just felt a whirlwind and his whole body was uncontrollable, only focused on wildly waving his knife. All the negative emotions that nobody confided in were hysterically vented this time. When Li Zijing regained his senses, he only saw a flesh and blood blurred corpse. Killed someone? Li Zijing lifted his head and looked around, his trembling face gradually becoming stable. The fierce cries of killing echoed in my ears again, and the Dashun army was like waves of relentless attacks on the Qing army. The battle situation has been determined, and the Qing army ambushed here will be completely annihilated. Wu. Just as I breathed a sigh of relief, I heard a melodious horn sound coming from behind. Horseshoe treading on the loess, the earth trembles, and the rumbling sound comes from behind. Li Zijing turned his head and saw everything in full view. Behind the direction of the Dashun army, the yellow dragon banner of the Qing army has been raised, and a large team of armored cavalry is rushing towards here, shaking their cold shining swords. A large group of Qing cavalry suddenly appeared behind him, like a bolt from the blue, hitting Li Zijing's heart. This battle is not over yet. Li Zijing looked around, and the old camp clearly did not expect the Qing cavalry to attack from behind. They were all pale-faced, constantly retreating, and everyone was in panic. Lu Fangliang actually did not have the habit of staying in the reserve team. Li Zijing knew that the reason why these hundreds of veteran camps were left in the back line was to protect his own safety. But now, these people have become the only active force in the rear of the Dashun army. Li Zijing felt like these old camps, at a loss. He looked up and anxiously searched through the chaotic army, hoping to find Lu Fangliang's figure. In the front line, Lu Fangliang, with his white horse and silver spear, stood under the blue banner, his back facing Li Zijing, leading hundreds of cavalry to quickly withdraw from the battle line, adjusting their formation, intending to make the final assembly against the Manchurian guards in front of the assault ditch. After several impacts, hundreds of elite cavalry from the old camp following Lu Fangliang have lost 1/3 of their strength. Almost every time they impact, many people fall off their horses and are cut to death by the rushing Manchu guards. Li Zijing opened his mouth, but did not shout out. It was discovered that reinforcements were coming from behind the Dashun army, and the Qing army in front of the ditch had once again reorganized, boosting morale and forming a defensive formation, like an iron barrel. Shio shio shio. Suddenly, several piercing sounds hit the air, followed by many old camps in the rear being hit by invisible arrow clusters, howling and falling to the ground. Kill! A roar from Lu Fangliang came from the front army, and at this moment, Lu Fangliang had already completed his formation, leading hundreds of elite cavalry from the old camp to crash into the Manchurian garrison standing in front of the ditch. The Qing cavalry rushing from behind had become increasingly close, and the rumbling sound of horse hooves was like a drum beating in the hearts of every soldier of the Dashun army in the rear. During the attack, the Qing army drew their bows and arrows again, forming a dense rain of arrows. More veteran soldiers died tragically by his side. Li Zijing had never seen such a scene before. He widened his eyes, but without hesitation, he flipped over and mounted his horse, eager to escape the battlefield. Without the leadership of a general, these seasoned and skilled old camps also tend to collapse. However, Li Zijing did not expect that as soon as he got on his horse, the hundreds of old camps in the rear seemed to have found the backbone and turned over to mount his horse. Even some Dashun veteran soldiers with arrows in their bodies are gritting their teeth and casting their unwavering gaze forward, like the figure of Li Zijing, one person and one horse. The figure of Li Zijing, who wanted to turn around and escape, paused for a moment. His hand tightly gripping the reins trembled slightly, and he once again turned his gaze to the Qing cavalry rushing towards him. Seeing the Qing army arched again, they aimed their bright arrows at themselves. Kill! Li Zijing's heart sank and he raised his goose feather sword, roaring angrily as he rushed out first. Kill! At the next moment, hundreds of elite riders from the old camp of Dashun behind each clenched their reins without any hesitation, waving their blood-shining swords and rushing out. Brothers, little Chuang Wang is bringing us to the rear. Kill all these Qing dogs. The deafening sound of shouting and killing echoed from the rear of the Dashun army, and all the remaining Dashun old camps were shouting and rushing towards the military formation composed of hundreds of Manchurian guards in front of the gully. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Baits. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Baits. The sound of hooves rolling like thunder. War horses intertwined, blood splattered everywhere. The Yanling sword in Li Zijing's hand was even more bloody, and the cold light was even more intense. Behind him, the elite cavalry of the old camp had four hooves in the wind, their long manes flying, shuttling back and forth in the crowd. Breaking limbs and flying horizontally, the sound of killing is deafening. I don't know when, but Li Zijing couldn't distinguish whether the pain or numbness coming from his left shoulder was pain or numbness. The originally black waistband arrow coat was also stained black and shiny with blood. As soon as these Qing armies clashed in front of him, Li Zijing knew that they were not the legitimate Manchu 8 banners. When fighting with the Manchurian protector just now, the broad-edged goose-winged sword he held was powerful and heavy. With one strike, Li Zijing's arms were numb from the shock. Before me, these Qing soldiers wielded light swords and fast horses with much lighter chopping power. Some of them were not particularly skilled in horsemanship, and even made Li Zijing feel a little relaxed. The gap between the old camp of Dashun and the green camp of the Qing army only became apparent at this time. Li Zijing tugged at the reins of the horse and gazed around, feeling no fear of escaping. After several rounds of hedging, only a few people were injured in the old camp, and most of them still roared vigorously. Not only did they not have a tired look on their faces, but they were also extremely excited. Looking down, most of the corpses lying on the ground were Qing soldiers. The old camp behind the palace, with less than 500 people, erupted with extremely strong combat power after mounting, almost crushing the more than 1,000 reinforcements of the Qing army's green camp cavalry. Without Li Zijing's orders, these elite cavalry from the old camp who had been fighting in the north and south for many years began to regroup and spontaneously gathered behind him, casting contemptuous glances at the distant green camp cavalry with frightened eyes. Li Zijing's expression cannot be said to be very relaxed, because this battle is far from achieving its goal. After several hours of fighting, the Dashun army was already panting with both men and horses, but they couldn't even touch the edge of the Qing army camp. At this moment, Lu Fangliang is leading all the old camp of Dashun in the rear to dismount and engage in infantry warfare, with the fresh army as the vanguard. The rear uses the Kaiyuan bow to shoot towards the gully. Arrows, accompanied by the sound of breaking through the air, poured down like raindrops, hitting the armor of the Manchurian guards. The throwing of the Kaiyuan bow causes minimal damage to the heavily armored Manchu guards, only disturbing their attention and giving the Dashun swordsmen in the front line an extra chance to strike. Perhaps that one blow could tear a deadly hole in the iron barrel-like formation of the Qing army. Steady. Shang Shan also knows that only by stabilizing the formation can there be a glimmer of vitality now. Lu Fangliang's eyes were slightly restless. All the Dashun army in the rear had already been pressed down, and the battle had already reached this point. However, he still couldn't defeat the hundreds of Manchurian defenders on the gully. The old camp of over 1,000 people, surprisingly, is in a state of anxiety with the Manchurian protectorate of less than 500 people. These Manchurian protectors were already gradually collapsing, but when they saw reinforcements coming, they burst out with a firm will to resist. Like a reef in the waves, it remained steadfast even when struck. Li Zijing shifted his gaze to the green camp cavalry in front of him, tightened his wild goose-winged sword, and finally froze on the yellow dragon banner behind the Han general. To completely defeat these Manchurian defenders, it is necessary to break down their psychological defenses and let them know that continuing to resist will only lead to a dead end. Slash the handsome flag. Li Zijing raised his sword and leaped his horse, charging forward again. Kill. The elite cavalry of the old camp, who had been rubbing their hands for a long time, immediately followed closely and were infected by Li Zijing's bravery, shouting loudly and rushing towards the bewildered Qing army's green camp cavalry. The green camp of the Qing army was originally composed of defeated Ming soldiers, and after several rounds of confrontation, it had already suffered severe damage. The fear of being killed by the elite cavalry of Dashun led to the disintegration of the military morale. Seeing Dashun's old camp rushing towards him, he collapsed and shouted loudly, scattering and fleeing. Slash those who retreat. Gung Zhongming led the Han army's yellow flag commander-in-chief to successively kill several fleeing green camp cavalry. Not only did he fail to curb the situation of the chaotic army's defeat, but even the commander-in-chief was almost dispersed. The quality of the Qing army's green camp cavalry was far inferior to those of the old Dashun camp who had been fighting for many years. They trampled on each other, scattered flags, howled everywhere, and in an instant fell into chaos. The green camp cavalry holding the yellow dragon banner widened their eyes, constantly looking left and right with a tense expression. The commanding team turned around and even threw down the banner in their hands, jumped off their horses, and fled with their heads in their arms. In a moment, they disappeared into the crowd of defeated soldiers. The elite cavalry from the old camp of Dashun rushed towards them, completely dispersing the order that Gung Zhongming was striving to maintain. The green camp soldiers and horses scattered and fled, with cries, begging for mercy, and screams echoing in his ears. Li Zijing instinctively lowered his head and glanced at the blood-dripping yen feather blade in his hand, feeling a commotion in his chest and abdomen. The feeling of winning the battle was so beautiful. One after another, the green camp soldiers collapsed under the sword of the elite cavalry of the old camp in Dashun. Although their numbers were greater than those pursuing them, they were already defeated like mountains. Gung Zhongming never expected that his green camp would be so uncontrollable. Leaving the Green Mountains without worrying about firewood, seeing that the chaos was unstoppable, Gung Zhongming made a decisive decision and led the few remaining green camp cavalry to rush back to the main camp on horseback. A burst of cheers appeared. Li Zijing turned his head and saw that a veteran soldier from Dashun had already jumped off his horse. He picked up the yellow dragon banner that had been thrown on the ground by the Qing army's green camp and returned to his horse, vigorously shaking it. "Did you win?" Lu Fangliang drew his iron gun out of the body of the Manchurian protector in front of him, blood splattered on his face, but his face remained unchanged. Then he lifted his eyes and looked forward. The cheers of the Dashun army have drowned out the cries of killing on the battlefield, and the iconic yellow dragon banner of the Qing army is being ridden and danced by an old cavalry. The hundreds of old camps around Li Zijing were like sharp blades, destroying the over 1,000 green camp cavalry brought by Gung Zhongming and completely tearing them apart. The reinforcements have crumbled, and the Manchurian defenders outside the ravine looked at the yellow dragon banner being waved by the bandits, their hearts shattered and their faces filled with disbelief. Shang Shan lost consciousness for a moment, and the formation he had worked hard to maintain suddenly became chaotic. The Dashun army in the rear formation was like fighting chicken blood, each with extraordinary courage, directly dispersing the formation of the Manchu protectorate in front of the gully, separating them. Lu Fangliang's tiger eyes searched around and finally stood at the end of the crowd. The escort leader Shang Shan, dressed in red flag and iron armor, was soaked in blood all over his body. At this moment, he was vigorously wielding his wide-edged goose-wing sword, killing one old camp after another in Dashun. Lu Fangliang's eyes tightened and rushed straight towards Shang Shan. Woo! Woo 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 woo! Just as everyone thought victory was about to come, there were sudden and rapid horn sounds coming from all over. The three yellow dragon flag shines brightly against the golden sunrise, and on the horizon, banners are dense, suddenly forming a dense army. Countless Qing troops, like the same stormy waves, rushed towards us. The deafening cries of killing suddenly echoed through the plain outside the Jindo Pass. The Manchurian soldiers are here. Manchu soldiers are everywhere. Li Zijing took a cold breath and looked around. The Dashun veteran camp, whose smiles were still hanging on their faces, had already shown extreme fear in their eyes. The earth beneath my feet trembled, and a sense of helplessness instantly overwhelmed the joy of victory. Under the yellow dragon banner in the middle, Duoduo, dressed in white flag and iron armor, slowly took off his helmet and looked expressionlessly at everything happening near the gully. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Final Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Final Battle. Banners hunt and sound in the strong wind, and the yellow dragon on the banner dances its teeth and claws vividly. The chaotic sound of horse hooves in his ears gradually approached, and Duoduo glanced sideways and waited quietly. I have come to apologize to Prince Yu. Gung Zhongming knelt on both knees, his eyes dodging, his armor covered in loess, and he ran so hard that he even lost his helmet. The several Han cavalry of the Zhenhuang banner following behind him were also in a state of shock and embarrassment, anxiously waiting for the final verdict. Duoduo, who had always been known for his brutality, was now terrifyingly calm. He only glanced coldly at the defeated Han army soldiers and then withdrew his gaze to the battlefield near the gully. I didn't have much hope for these Han people, so naturally there wouldn't be too much disappointment. The Manchurian escort formation near the gully has been dispersed, leaving only a few dozen people struggling to support it. Duoduo's eyes narrowed slightly, and he understood in his heart that Chongzhen could no longer be saved. The cavalry behind Lu Fangliang's palace is only a few hundred, and you brought over 1,000 people to save them. Why did you lose so quickly? Geng Zhongming looked up hastily, his voice trembling. Those cavalry soldiers were all old camps around Li Thief. The servants were caught off guard by the attack, and their subordinates were dispersed, unable to even stop them from killing the defeated soldiers. I'm a servant. I really did my best, my lord. Duoduo held down the wide-edged goose-winged sword that had not yet been sheathed at his waist, emitting a terrifying killing intent. After pondering for a while, he finally let out a cold snort and raised his hand to signal. Li Thief came prepared this time, we can't blame you all. Get up. Geng Zhongming and others were immediately surprised and quickly stood up. I am grateful to Prince Yu. Duoduo raised his whip and pointed towards the rear of the Dashun army, gazing into the distance. What is the reason why the bandits' tactics tonight are different from before? Geng Zhongming rode forward, still feeling lingering fear when recalling the scene of the recent battle. The bandits who robbed the camp tonight carried many firearms, one of which was the unstoppable cannon recorded in the Fire Dragon Divine Book. After being released, it was poisoned with smoke, and the Ming army used it exclusively for robbing the camp. In terms of the terrain where the gullies sink downwards, if caught by bandits and thrown with unstoppable guns, it would be a near death. Duoduo's throat twitched slightly and he sneered. The bullshit Fire Dragon God Book, its title is just scary. The great Qing warriors, never fear their firearms. Geng Zhongming himself was a defeated general. Although he and Duoduo were both kings and nobles, one was a master and the other was a servant, with vastly different positions. He had to flatter and apologize. Although he said that, Duoduo's eyes were deep, and he knew that as the head coach, he could not underestimate the enemy's carelessness. In the Battle of Bairi, Chongzhen led 500 Manchurian protectors and directly broke through the right wing of the Dashun army, like a sharp knife inserted into the central army. In the end, only 3 people were killed in action. Previously, he had always believed that the 500 elite Manchurian guards led by Chongzhen, along with over 1,000 Green Camp cavalry, could easily defeat any ambush of bandits. Unexpectedly, the war situation would develop like this. The Manchu protectorate ambushed was discovered, trapped near the gully and unable to move. It was gradually depleted, and more than 1,000 Green Camp cavalry sent to rush for reinforcements were quickly defeated. From this perspective, these bandits are something new. Geng Zhongming was defeated in the first battle, with no face left, and he was even more eager to show himself in front of his master. My lord, I am willing to be the vanguard and make meritorious contributions. Duoduo looked at him up and down, his whip swaying in his hand. No need, I will give you 10,000 green camps. You can line up outside the Jindo Pass to prevent Li thieves from leaving. Compared to Li Zicheng's army, it is obvious that these long-fought and exhausted divisions near the gully are more like soft persimmons. Geng Zhongming really does not want to face the main force of the Dashun army directly. But it is obvious that after being defeated last night, Duoduo no longer trusts him as the main general of the Han army. Don't worry, my lord. I will not disappoint you. Duoduo ignored Geng Zhongming's concern and rode forward with his broad-edged goose-winged sword, taking a step forward to see the entire situation near the gully. Then, he waved his whip upwards. Behind him, the Qing army was moving vigorously, with people moving closely and their heads moving. The 3 yellow dragon flags stood in 3 different directions, and as they were about to approach the ditch, a rapid gong sound came out and suddenly stopped. The fire gradually extinguished, and dozens of unidentified Manchurian bodyguards collapsed in a ditch. After occasional crackling explosions, only a patch of burnt earth remained. After a night of fighting, Lu Fangliang, like the others, was already exhausted. After pulling out his iron gun, he fell to the ground, panting heavily. Lu Fangliang went to find the Qing army general wearing a red-edged iron armor for a reason. During the day, Lu Fangliang was ordered by Li Zicheng to lead over 1,000 elite cavalry from the old camp to charge against the Qing army camp. At that time, it was this Qing general dressed in red armor who led the Manchu protectorate and resisted his charge, forcing Li Zicheng to withdraw Lu Fangliang when the front army was in urgent need. Finally, this Qing general appeared unexpectedly on the right wing of the Dashun army with the Manchu protectorate, defeating the archers and gunners left behind by Li Zicheng in one fell swoop. Lu Fangliang pulled out the iron gun that was deeply inserted into Shang Shan's body. His black waistband arrow suit was riddled with wounds, and he coldly spat at the familiar figure lying on the ground. Good death. With a foul breath, Lu Fangliang lifted his eyes and looked around, feeling the changes on the battlefield at this moment. The Qing army took advantage of the night and rushed forward, encircling the battlefield near the ditch last night, making it impassable. There are only two paths left in front of these old camps of the Dashun army, either surrendering in humiliation or dying in battle. But the problem is that the Qing army still gave preferential treatment to the Ming army's surrender, but never left any hands on these old camps of the Dashun army. Since the retreat of Shangguan, all surrendered old camps in Dashun have been brutally killed. In history, the Tongguan garrison commander of Dashun, Ma Shiyao, surrendered with 7,000 Dashun soldiers and was completely killed by Duoduo. So the two paths became one, just a battle to the death. The Qing army, surrounded by fresh clothes and angry horses, was full of energy. Although the Dashun army near the gully annihilated the 500 Manchurian protectors stationed here, they were all injured and disheartened. No one thinks they will live out again today, everything is over. After Lu Fangliang's revenge, his pleasure was completely gone, and he suddenly felt that he was not a good leader. The overnight battle not only failed to detect the ambush under the gully in time, but also had no foresight of the Qing army's three-sided encirclement tactics. At present, the Qing army has completed the encirclement, and there is no chance of winning or escaping. The remaining Dashun old camp consists of only 1,000 people, and the besieged Qing army is at least tens of thousands. The comparison between the two sides is really insignificant. Now they are like a solitary boat in the sea, at any moment they may be submerged in the crowd of the Qing army. Lu Fangliang looked gloomy and threw the blood-stained iron gun onto the ground. Li Zijing led his yellow-brown warhorse forward, crossing over the corpses of various forms of death on the ground. His eyes were already numb and indifferent. Surrender by others may lead to survival, surrender by oneself is definitely a blow. Having reached this point, Li Zijing doesn't want to continue waiting to die. He must fight to make a living. Dong! Dong dong dong. At the other end of the horizon, rhythmic drumbeats were being heard. The old camp members of Dashun, who were sitting on the ground in a state of decadence, all stopped at the same time, creating some kind of tacit understanding, and looked up towards the distance. That's the familiar military drum. 9 months ago, the Dashun army, wielding 1,000,000 soldiers, was accompanied by the sound of drums to break through Ningwu and surrender to Xuanda. Along the way, they were unstoppable and overthrew the corrupt Ming court. The ground beneath my feet trembled and rumbled, even the yellow soil and gravel were jumping joyfully. From southeast to northwest, intense cries of killing gradually rang out from all directions, surging like mountains and tsunamis. Li Zijing stood up and gazed into the distance, only to see the smoke and dust rolling in the rear of the Qing army, and the battalion was constantly mobilizing. More and more old camps of the Dashun army stood up, and a great sense of hope shattered the dying despair. Lu Fangliang picked up the iron gun, gritted his teeth to support himself, and coincidentally, Li Zijing turned around to look back. The two exchanged glances, and Lu Fangliang looked at Li Zijing, who was standing under the sunset holding a steel knife, recognizing the burning fire in his eyes that was different from anyone else's. Lu Fangliang took a step back, and Li Zijing nodded slightly at him. Win. Dashun is sure to win. The beating of drums continued, and the shouting grew closer and closer. When the first blue banner of the King of Glory appeared in sight, more than 1,000 Dashun soldiers could no longer suppress their excitement and burst into fierce cheers. Everyone knows that the real battle has begun. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Shield Car. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Shield Car. Li Zijing jumped off his horse and found the tallest boulder to climb up, overlooking the movements of the Qing army on 3 sides. The more you look, the more solemn your expression becomes. The shouting and killing became increasingly intense, but did not get closer, which only indicates that the main force of the Dashun army had taken advantage of the situation to kill outside the pass, but was stopped by the Qing army. At this moment, Li Zijing's face changed. The soldiers in the rear of the Qing army shouted loudly, and after some mobilization, they suddenly launched a row of shield cars with tiger heads printed on them. In later TV dramas, there is always a saying that goes, the Qing Dynasty ruled the world with horseback riding and archery. It gives people an inherent impression that the reason why the Qing Dynasty was able to dominate the world was solely due to the skillful archery of the Manchu 8 banners and the use of cavalry to charge and solve all battles. However, this is not the case. When preparing his graduation thesis, Li Zijing consulted a large amount of historical materials and found that the Qing army not only made good use of artillery, but also had a weapon that was considered essential in the military. Many Qing generals even had the habit of not going to war without wearing this weapon. It is these shield cars that have been pushed to the front line. The so-called shield vehicle is actually a type of wooden tank. The carriage is equipped with double-layer decks on 3 sides, filled with sand and soil between the 2 decks, and covered with 2 layers of soaked cotton quilts outside the decks, which have extremely strong defensive capabilities. The Qing army often hid behind shield cars and could effectively resist various bows, arrows, firearms, and even light artillery fire. They could advance and attack, while retreating could defend. Dealing with the Dashun army without heavy artillery is a powerful weapon. Li Zijing's gaze circled in front of the Qing army on 3 sides, and finally returned to the crowd behind him, realizing that everyone's face was very ugly. The horses under the crowd were restlessly scratching their hooves, and the blood-colored tiger heads engraved in front of these shield cars were pouring out their mouths, as if they could rush over and swallow them at any moment. Even Li Zijing's yellow-brown warhorse began to sway its tail and become restless. Among the over 1,000 elite cavalry from the old camp of Dashun near the gully, many people had fought against the Qing army in the border and quickly recognized these things that were pushed to the front of the formation. If the Qing army could still try to break through with these skilled cavalry before launching shield chariots, then now the idea of breaking through has completely dissipated. Although Lu Fangliang looked down upon Li Zijing, inexperienced adventurer, before embarking on the expedition, it was he who ultimately trapped over 1,000 old camps in this battle. At critical moments, it's important to know the right balance. Qing Go surrounded our army for a long time, neither firing guns nor charging. Instead, he pushed out shield trucks, fearing that he might not have any good intentions. The pain on Li Zijing's left shoulder gradually became clear, but he no longer had the heart to pay attention. His attention was focused on the battlefield, which was filled with the deafening sound of killing for miles, constantly paying attention to the movements of the Qing army on 3 sides. Li Zijing gritted his teeth and jumped off the boulder, walking to the side of the warhorse. With his right hand gripping the reins and his left hand pressing on the back of the warhorse's neck, he endured the pain while also trying to soothe the warhorse. The Qing army's shield chariot can contain the horse's momentum, and we are now the bait. Upon hearing these words, Lu Fangliang hated himself even more. If I had listened to your persuasion last night, I wouldn't have ended up in the current situation. Duoduo, that dog thief is keeping us to lure the emperor down to save us. Li Zijing gave him a quiet glance, with no hint of blame in his eyes. In fact, Li Zijing also knew in his heart that he, as a descendant, relied solely on knowing history in advance to speak out and remind others, rather than relying on any battlefield skills to predict. If we really want to lead the army, Li Zijing is inexperienced and may not be as good as Lu Fangliang. At least when Lu Fangliang leads the cavalry in battle, he dares to charge and fight, and as a vanguard, he is qualified. It's too late to say anything now. Letting our brothers charge for the shield chariot is equivalent to seeking death. Compared to tens of thousands of Qing soldiers, the number of cavalry in the 1,000-plus caravan is a bit too small. Speaking, Li Zijing paused. General Ji, would you like to hear my opinion? Lu Fangliang's face slightly changed, and then she smiled with relief and nodded lightly. Before this expedition, many people had the same thoughts as Lu Fangliang. Apart from his identity as the third younger brother of Emperor Yongchang, Li Zijing has been in the camp for many years without any merit, and he does not have a legitimate lineage of one soldier and one general, making it difficult for people to listen to his advice as a personal statement. However, after last night, many people's opinions have changed, and there is a hint of admiration in the eyes of Li Zijing. After calming the mount, Li Zijing bent down to pick up the paper ball on the ground. In my humble opinion, if the Qing army wanted to eliminate us, they would have taken action long ago. They kept us until now only because they wanted to take the opportunity to provide assistance, so the only thing they can do now is wait. Before embarking on the expedition, the general brought 200 Thunderbolt guns and 200 unstoppable guns each. Now, he needs to gather all the remaining firearms and bows and arrows and send them to the brothers who know how to use them. Once there is a chance to break through, we must use it all. Lu Fangliang's eyebrows and eyes twitched slightly as she suddenly remembered that she had brought many firearms before going on the expedition. It was also unexpected that these 400 firearms would have such a great impact. Looking at Li Zijing, who was commanding everyone in an orderly manner, Lu Fangliang didn't know what he felt in his heart. He had never had any involvement with Li Zijing before, and now it seems that Li Zijing's performance on the battlefield is completely different from what is rumored. Not only was he very proficient in the use of firearms, but he also had an extremely sensitive sense of smell on the battlefield. Lu Fangliang clearly remembered that Li Zijing had declared to guard against the ambush of the Qing army after he proposed to rob the camp. Fighting all night, Li Zijing's words yesterday were accurate. Lu Fangliang struggled to stand up, his eyes fixed on the motionless Qing army formation on three sides in the distance. All that can be done at this moment is these. As the Qing army on three sides launched several rows of shield cars facing the direction of the ditch, Li Zijing's mood also plummeted. Duoduo rode his horse and stood on the slope, scanning the entire battlefield expressionlessly. When Li Zijing climbed up and looked, Duoduo's gaze immediately shifted, and then he frowned slightly. This bandit is not particularly tall and is dressed in an ordinary black arrow coat, but he stands out among the surrounded group of bandits. Duoduo stared closely at Li Zijing for a while before turning his gaze to the battlefield behind him. The flags were waving, and the sound of gunfire echoed everywhere. The Qing army was fighting against the Dashun army, with tens of thousands of people and horses crossing each other. The sound of shouting and killing shook the heart and lungs. On the plain, there were dense and ant-like armies of Dashun. These bandits swept away yesterday's defeat and decadence, dressed in various arrow robes, rushing out of the Jindo Pass, and the tide fiercely pounded the green camp formation listed by Gung Zhongming under the Jindo Pass. Cavalry after cavalry, the ordered soldiers rushed out from the rear of the Qing army and arrived at the small slope where Duoduo was located. Report to Prince Yu, the main force of the bandits has been fully deployed, and the attack is rapid. King Huaishuan has repelled the fierce General Lu Zongmin's charge 3 times and is unable to withstand the battle. He requests reinforcements. Duoduo listened to the trembling sound of the riders reporting, his face calm as usual. Outside the Jindo Pass, there is a flat terrain. Gung Zhongming formed an early formation, although he does not have any advantage at the moment, he will not be defeated for a while. Putting down the 1,000-mile mirror, Duoduo's face remained unchanged, but his heart was filled with suspicion. Lu Zongmin is the most formidable general among the adventurers, and Duoduo has always wanted to personally kill him to prove his bravery. This time, Lu Zongmin personally led the charge with a deadly posture. Judging from this style, Li Zicheng doesn't seem to be here to save people, but rather to seek his own life. The details of the Green Camp under Geng Zhongming's command, Duoduo, were very clear. This group of Han soldiers surrendered and followed the Manchu Eight Banners to fight the downwind battle, which was not reliable. What are the origins of these bandits in Chongzhen, willing to let Li Zicheng personally lead an army of 80,000 Shun to come and rescue them? Duoduo's original intention was to surround more than 1,000 Shun soldiers who came to rob the camp, implement the classic tactic of besieging and supporting, and lure some of Li Zicheng's troops out of the Duoduo Pass to wait and annihilate them. Unexpectedly, all the main forces of the Shun army suddenly came out. In this way, the pre-arranged ambush seems somewhat inadequate, and Geng Zhongming, who should have been defeated again to lure the enemy deeper, cannot easily be defeated now. Otherwise, the central army of Duoduo will face Lu Zongmin's main force directly. Strange. Duoduo looked back and once again turned his gaze to the gully. Just relying on Lu Fangliang is not enough to make Li Thief attach such importance. Duoduo had no doubt that as long as there were some flaws in his three-sided military formation, these bandits would engage in a fierce battle of trapped beasts and charge towards the rear of the formation. Send an order to return to the camp, ordering the Red Banner Belenikin to command 3,000 armored soldiers from Manchuria and 10,000 green camps to rush to support Geng Zhongming, and make sure to drag down the main force of the bandits outside the Duoduo Pass. The commander of the Yellow Banner Protectorate, Tu Lai, was ordered to mobilize 500 elite guards from the three Manchu banners to encircle the eastern mountain and cut off the passage for the bandits to retreat to Duoduo Pass. One command after another emanated from the slope, and Duoduo felt quite proud. Li Zicheng, no matter what you're risking your life for, I won't miss this millennium opportunity. Duoduo held down the wide-edged goose-winged sword at his waist and spoke coldly to himself. I have prepared my beheading knife for you. Brothers, it's important to keep reading during the new book period. End of this chapter.